Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another Forge Ask Me Anything AMA. We'll give folks one more minute to jump in. Lot that I want to try to cover because let's face it, Mr. Carwash is a fantastic Tucson success story, and I really want to dig into how that happened and how we got there. So for those of you that maybe this is the first AMA or you haven't regularly attended, this is a monthly Ask Me Anything series that last month we spoke with a panel that was focused on helping entrepreneurs working with the US government and all the various resources, funding, and other things that are available to people. Next month, we will have Kevin Groman. Kevin is the founding principal of Crown Canyon Capital. He's also the co-founder and general partner at Sonoran Founders Fund. So please be sure to register for and tune in for November's AMA with Kevin. If you don't know what Forge is the University of Arizona's entrepreneurial mindset unit, supporting both students and the community in finding the opportunities and resources to translate ideas to impact. Lastly, I just want to do a couple quick shout outs to thank folks from the town of Sahuarita, Arizona Tech Council, YWCA, City of Tucson, and of course, our many University of Arizona partners for your support and endorsement on this series and everything else that we do at Forge. So with that, you all had an opportunity to read his bio. I'm not going to go through that part, but I do want to ask and welcome, first of all, thank you, John, for joining us. John, you are the CEO, you are the chairman, you are the president as well of Mr. Carwash.
And chief bottle washer.
And chief bottle washer of Mr. Carwash. Thanks so much for being here with us today on this Ask Me Anything. I want to start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as we might define it, which is you're a University of Arizona alum. What did you study, and were you a good student?
So yes, I graduated. I wasn't a good student. I graduated December of 1987. It took me 5 years with a little break in between where I had to go to Pima Community College because I was actually kicked out of the U of A because my GPA fell below 2.0. I was unprepared emotionally when I first entered into college. I think like many 18-year-olds, I didn't take it for granted, but my priorities were not where they should have been. And U of A can be kind of a party school, and I definitely fell into that trap. And my GPA reflected that for sure. I played on the U of A club lacrosse team, which was also a distraction. It was fun, but that took away from my studies. But to be honest with you, Brian, as I reflect back on what I consider a very unconventional path to where I am today, getting that cold shower where I got what they called at the time a PIP program, the personal improvement program, where they said, hey, your GPA is so horrendous that you no longer qualify to be a student here. And so as a shock to the system and a wake-up call for me to get my act together, I think every person in life has that cold shower moment where they say, hey, I better take this thing seriously and I got to figure this thing out. And so it was actually one semester at Pima was that wake-up call, and I came back a different person and completely focused on raising my GPA so that I could graduate. And I'll never forget when I finally got that piece of paper as a general studies major, which to me was kind of this blend of just a bunch of different things, and how hard it was because I wasn't the most marketable candidate for a new job coming out of school with a really shitty GPA and a major that didn't really say what direction I wanted to go. But in having to explain my poor GPA, what I did, I felt it was a really clever move. But my dad helped me with this. He said, "Well, let's take your 5 year grade point average, and we're going to plot it year one, year two. We'll have the gap year piece, and then year three and year four. And what we'll show is this kind of regression analysis of this trend line." So I was able to uh, help position my journey as one of, you can look at this thing in totality, or you can look at where directionally my future is going. And the line was up and to the right. One company happened to bite and believe in me, took a chance. And one of the things that was a particular strength of mine was my ability to connect with people and communicate. And I used a story. I'll never forget this in the interview that I think ultimately got me my first job, and it was with Carnation Company, which was a part of Nestle in consumer packaged goods. I used a story of Dr. J, Julius Irving, who was a basketball player in the 70s and one of my idols as a kid. And I'll give you the short version of the story, but Dr. J went on to become a successful business person in Philadelphia. And they asked him, and this interview really resonated with me. They said, "Dr. J, how did you transition from the NBA to business, and what do you attribute your success to in business?" And he goes, "I learned a long time ago from a communication standpoint that you need to be able to adjust your style to the group that you're with." And he simplified that by saying, there's the boardroom and there's a locker room. And if you go into a boardroom speaking as if you're in the locker room, you're not going to connect. Conversely, if you go into the locker room with a bunch of boardroom language, you're also not going to be able to connect. So the best communicators are ones that are able to understand their audience and then connect with them. And that's been one of my strengths, I think, and skills. And that's helped get me to kind of where I am today, because our business is very much people driven, and it's all about people and the magic inside of our organization. And I don't want to jump too far ahead here. Has been, our ability to bring out the best in over 6,000 employees, and they're now delivering this exceptional level of customer service. But I'll pause there, Brian, and let you pick up.
Yeah, we will definitely come back to that, because I do want to talk about company culture and that side of it. But because we are finding opportunities and resources to grow entrepreneurs, we're always very interested in the individual journey, and particularly because in working, for example, with students, many of them are often preoccupied with, well, what should I major in, and what's going to help me, and what if I don't get the right job out of college? And I will confess that when I mentor students, I often tell them, don't get preoccupied with what you do first, because no one follows a straight path in their careers, in their journeys. Can you talk a little bit about your path from the university to Mr. Carwash, what stops along the way? And I'll say this facetiously, I'm sure it all went exactly according to plan, right?
Yes, no, it's all worked out. No, so my first 5 years out of college were in the consumer packaged goods space, working for Nestle, selling everything from dog food to infant formula to grocery stores. And it is as fundamental, and you want to talk about a bedrock industry in a sector, the food business, one that we all need to sustain and live, but how fiercely competitive it is and how cutthroat it can be. Where grocery stores are operating famously on 1% margins. But it really, the real learning, I think we can all admit, happens post college, where you're thrown, into the fire and having to figure things out really quickly. But for me, it was extremely formative to learn all the fundamental building blocks of how business works, from pricing to distribution to sales to marketing, and touching all of those things. I'm always surprised where kids can graduate from college but not understand how to calculate a profit margin, right? Which blows me away. And so those are the things that I learned in my first 5 years on the job at Nestle. But then also I had to learn how to behave, right? And how to work in a large multinational organization, which can again be kind of cutthroat and dog eat dog, and uh, you know, uh, uh, a lot of turf stuff. So at the 5-year mark, and I'll try to be concise here, I was approached to work for a more entrepreneurial opportunity here. So I went up to Phoenix. I spent 5 years in Phoenix, and then there was an opportunity for me to move back to Tucson to work for a company called Blue Coral Systems, which is a specialty chemical company selling to commercial car washes. And that's how I landed in this crazy space. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be in this industry doing what I'm doing. But I spent 7 years with Blue Coral selling to a very fragmented independent marketplace. And my particular job is to call on national accounts, oil companies primarily that had car washes inside their retail gas stations, C-store, and car washes. 7 years doing that. Again, very entrepreneurial, small company. The company was eventually sold to Quaker State Motor Oil. We were this industrial division that then got spun off to Ecolab, which is a Fortune 500 company out of St. Paul, Minnesota. Ecolab attempted to get a vehicle care division off the ground, but it wasn't a strategic fit for them. So they spun it off. And in that spinoff, I elected to part ways. That was in 2000. And that was when the dot-com explosion actually had hit its zenith, and we were right at the bubble of the dot-com implosion. And so I entered, my timing was horrendous because I entered into a space where capital spending on software had actually started to contract precipitously. But I worked for a small company here in Tucson called Finance Center, which was selling web-based applications to financial services companies. And I did that for 2 years. It was probably the most intellectually stimulating job, reinventing myself completely, going into software from specialty chemicals. Learned a ton, but it wasn't the most lucrative. And I had 4 kids and a mortgage, and all the pressures that come with having to support a family. And Mr. Carwash at the time had just recently moved from Boston to Tucson. They were a 32 store chain, super tiny, but they approached me because of my experience at Blue Coral and the fact that I lived here, and they felt that I'd be a good candidate to kick off their market development arm, which is a fancy name for a guy that wore a lot of hats. So I went back into a smaller, actually Finance Center was small too, another smaller kind of early stage company that was struggling to make payroll. We had all sorts of issues, a messed up balance sheet, a whole bunch of toxic debt, tired investors, infighting, strategic missteps. I mean, all the gory stuff that happens in a small company. And so my first, I'm going to say 10 years at Mr. Carwash. And if there's one underlying message to any of the students on the line, it's that, if anything, as I see where I am today, it's persistence. Persistence really is something that pays off. I see so many of my friends at this stage of my life who had gotten cold feet or had jumped to move on to another organization too quickly. I chose to stick it out, and it wasn't easy. So 19 years later, here we are. We just rang the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. It's been, a lifelong journey for me. And now what had started off as kind of, to be honest with you, just a job, has turned into my passion and my life's purpose. And while I'm hardworking, I'm not that smart, but I give it my all. I think, did you ever listen to any Guy Raz, How I Built This? At the end of every interview of the founders, and I'm not a founder, but I'm kind of founder-like in that I've just been at this thing for a long time. They'll always ask the question, so how much of your success do you attribute to hard work and talent, and how much of it do you attribute to luck? And almost every founder attributes half of their success to luck. And I would say almost 75% of my success has been, and I feel very fortunate, I pinch myself, due to timing and market conditions, and the sector that we're in happens to be a really hot sector. So for all those reasons, I'm one of the luckiest guys that I know.
I would maybe add to the this persistence quality, tolerance of ambiguity. It's the one that I like to point out, because if you expect everything to be written down and clear, and this is exactly what you're going to do, maybe this sort of thing isn't the right fit for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you're this was Mr. Carwash is a 19-year overnight success.
Yeah, hardly. If I were to show you the chart, it was almost 12 years of flat, where we had 32 stores. And then I'll give you the short version here. The business was actually founded by a private equity firm, a small boutique firm out of San Francisco, that saw this space as a very fragmented industry, and they thought it was right for a roll-up consolidation play. I cringe when I hear those words because there's a lot of negative perceptions around roll-ups, and this notion that this big fish is gobbling up smaller fish, and then cutting costs, and through synergies creating value. That was not our play at all. But what I think the firm out of San Francisco underestimated was the capital intensive nature of our space, and what it truly takes to actually build a national chain of car washes, and the economics around a single location. It takes about $5.5 million to get one store completely built, and that's land, building, technology, etc. And so to build a national chain of stores that costs $5 million per store requires a lot of money, and they didn't have that access to capital. So when you don't, I mean, one of the biggest reasons why companies are unable to fulfill their dream is access to money. So we limped along, and during that time, we were forced to, out of necessity, get really good at operating car washes. And so rather than being on this acquisition spree through M&A and new unit growth, we, as a flatline company, looked inward and had to improve, same store sales, and we got really good at all the fundamentals. And so the dark ages for us, the silver lining in the cloud, was, we're an operations excellence company that happens to be very acquisitive. And now more recently, we're on a greenfield de novo growth strategy of building our own stores. But just to fast forward, we had a second round private equity firm come in that was able to unlock what for us was this thing right in front of us, where we had all the land that we had owned on our balance sheets. And if we were generating at the time 20% returns, four-wall EBITDA margins at a store, and you have all this land that may be appreciating at 3%, we can make more if we put those dollars, those millions of dollars, to use. So we deployed a sale leaseback strategy where we would sell to a REIT the land, convert the proceeds into rent, and so we burdened our stores with a higher rent nut, which meant we made less EBITDA from that store, but we unlocked all these dollars to allow us to go out and acquire more stores. And then, private equity, for those that are familiar with the model, they're buying, but they're also selling at a certain point once the company increases in value. And so it's not a long-term hold, but they have a longer-term time horizon. And that time horizon is typically in the 5 to 7 year window-ish, 3 to 7, depending upon their harvest intentions. And so we had hit that 7-year mark with our second firm, and the sponsor-to-sponsor sale is very common these days. So there was another financial sponsor called Leonard Green out of Los Angeles, very respected PE firm, one of the top 20 PE firms in the country. They believed in us when we were still a relatively ugly duckling and fledgling, and with warts and shortcomings. They saw the potential and they believed in the story. And this is 7 years ago. And at the time, we were acquired for roughly $550 million. Our run rate EBITDA at the time was $43 million. I know that number is etched in stone. And when I say run rate, it's not what we were actually doing, but what we were projecting to do on a pro forma basis. Just to fast forward to where we are today, the company was valued, there's enterprise value. I'll do market cap right now at and the stock is kind of bumping along here. We're at 5.3 billion market cap. So we went from a $500 million company to a $5.3 billion company. I think more importantly, and this is private equity speak, their return on their investment metric is a term that they call multiple on invested capital, MOIC. And it's a very simple model of the expectation is a 2.5 to 3x return on invested capital. So if you put in $1 million over a 5-year window, the hope is that you get 3 million back out. And so, over 5 years, that's roughly a 20% IRR, which compared to other investments, if the S&P is at 6%. S&P is kind of crazy right now, but historically S&P has been at 6%. In this alternative investment class, private equity, if you can get a 15% return, that's helping you balance your portfolio. So private equity has had a really good run in the last 10 years plus in generating those types of returns. We're really, really happy that we were able to return 20x multiple on invested capital, because the 500 million that they used to acquire Mr. Carwash, half of that was debt, right? So private equity is notorious for levering up companies, borrowing a bunch to buy the companies. But their actually equity check was close to half the total deal value. In most cases, is typically 20% of the total deal value. So they leaned in and paid up for us at the time, but it's now proven to be their single largest return for their show. We returned on paper, and they're in the harvest mode, over $4 billion back to the shareholders. And so it's been a huge success. And if I sound like I'm bragging, I'm taking a little victory lap just because you give me the platform, Brian, to do it. It's not our style. We want to stay humble and stay hungry and keep both feet on the ground. But, overnight, ringing the bell in the New York Stock Exchange was a huge, huge emotional event for us. Being the only company that has listed right now in the New York Stock Exchange here in Tucson, I think there's some symbolism here. I'm really happy for the city. And most importantly, I'm happy for our team members, because we have a very egalitarian kind of sharing mindset. And so we have spread equity far and wide within this organization. And it wasn't just the shareholders and the fat cats and private equity that benefited. It's been all of our team members that helped us along this journey. We have changed their lives forever. And not just at the headquarter level too, at store level. And the one final thing, Brian, and then I'll shut up, is that coming out of this thing, as we sized our next round incentive plan for the leadership team, it was my dream to be able to spread even further equity, because I believe linking, interest is an obvious thing, but doing it in a way where there's a real slice of the pie that our team members can get. So today, we have 365 stores. Every one of our site managers owns a piece of Mr. Carwash in a meaningful way through a restricted stock unit grant that we just granted to them. And the plan is that on an annual basis, there's going to be these ongoing grants, not options, but grants that have tangible real value with a vest period. But that has been hugely uplifting from a morale perspective, as you would expect. And it just speaks to the culture of our organization. So I'll pause there.
Well, no, I mean, that's a perfect lead in, because I mentioned before, I want to talk a little bit about culture. I think it's fair to say that the customer experience is absolutely critical for you and for Mr. Carwash. But let me start with a quick cultural question. Are you Mr. Carwash, or who is? And really, more importantly, how does the customer experience factor into who Mr. Carwash is and what people think about it?
So we are all Mr. Carwash, right? And 6,000 amazing men and women in 21 states, 65 cities, out there every day, delivering an exceptional customer experience. But through our people and with our people, we are people driven. And for me, the journey to really put the people at the center of our universe, when I first started in this organization, labor was viewed as a cost. Labor was viewed as something that we needed to mitigate and manage. But there was very little discussion around the lens of productivity. There was very little conversations around, what a more engaged, motivated, inspired workforce can do. And it was kind of to be very blunt, there was this crack the whip kind of mindset versus as simple as it sounds, the high five, pat on the back kind of approach to getting the best out of people. And so there was a light bulb moment where we said, hey, at the end of the day, as service providers, if one of our distinct competitive advantages was going to be the customer service component of our service model, what can we do to get people to smile, to show some love to our customers, to move at a greater clip where there's a skip in their step. It doesn't happen through putting smile posters up in the lobby or some fancy mission statement slogans on the wall of your headquarters. Because we've seen companies that do that, and to me, it's very not just disingenuous. There's a disconnect. When I hear CEOs talk about culture, but then when I go visit their offices and I see a bunch of long faces and people that don't appear to be very happy, I'm like, well, wait a second. What do we need to do to fix that? So as we re-examined our whole approach to labor, our team members, we said, hey, every person's got a story. Uh, we need to take care of them. And we started with, again, I call these the fundamental building blocks, but paying them well. So whenever a CEO talks about culture, I say, well, that's great, we'll get there, but let's talk about your wages. What do you pay your people? What kind of benefits do you offer your people? What kind of training do you provide your team members? What kind of professional growth opportunities are there inside your organization? And if you are doing good things in all of those areas, and so I can go down each of those paths, Brian, if you want to, but I'm very proud of the things that we're doing in those areas. And I can talk about our average non-managerial hourly wage today, which by the way is north of $15. The benefit package that we offer for all of our associates, not just for management. I can go down the laundry list of things that we have invested in for them. And then the number of employees that have come up through, starting off as hourly employees that are now site managers or leaders of divisions that are making more than most lawyers and doctors, quite frankly. Those are great stories. It's not a but. And, the way in which we started treating people changed, not overnight. It took some time because a lot of leaders were more old school and hadn't had the role models of how to show love. And there was this fear of, well, if love and empathy and emotional intelligence, and these all sound good on paper, but if I show that I'm soft, the team's going to take advantage of me and they're going to run over me. We're like, no, actually, the best leaders are the ones that show that they deeply care about you as an individual. So like many good companies, we've adopted the servant leadership kind of philosophical beliefs. And, I perhaps overstate this a little bit, but I will tell people I'm the least important person in this entire organization. We've taken the pyramid and turned it upside down. And our purpose, our sole reason for being in our headquarters, we have 300 employees between our two campuses, is to serve the field, to make their lives easier, to help them be the best versions of themselves. And we're not perfect, right? And so we have our warts just like everybody else. But if you had an opportunity to visit a Mr. Carwash, which I'm hoping most of the Tucson-based folks here have, you would see an elevated level of service through our team members. And that doesn't happen, again, because we put up smile posters in the lobby. It's because we treat them well.
Bravo. No, and I love the servant leadership. I think it's such an important message and concept. And it's wonderful to hear that, because I think we don't spend enough time, like when you look at education, it dwells on sort of these basics, right? It's almost like math skills, but where and how does someone learn how to be a leader and how to especially get out of the way once you've empowered the team to perform? So I think that's a fantastic message.
Yeah. You know what I tell, we have workshops and we have Mr. Carwash University. So when I'm asked to speak to Mr. Carwash, I actually take a page out of education because I'm a public school kid. And I was fortunate enough, I think like many of us, to have, as I think back K through 12, there were 3 teachers that were particularly impactful in my life. And if I think about the common thread amongst those 3 and why they were so special, it's because 2 things. One, they cared and they believed that they had high expectations, but they believed that I could actually get there. And so for me, back to my sorry GPA, but I did really, really well in classes where the teachers were really tough and hard and good. And then for some reason, and this was all on me, I did really poorly when the teachers really didn't care and they were just going through the motions. And I didn't learn how to play the game of school, by the way, of how to brown nose and how to suck up to the professors that go into all the office hour stuff, and then manage to get the tests versus true knowledge. But now I'm going down a different path.
Yeah, we can save that for another session. We can talk about the educational piece.
Yeah.
Before we get to some of the audience questions, one other thing that you started to touch on, which is impact. And just thinking about how do you see the fact that you've now gone public, you're now the sole New York Stock Exchange traded company in Tucson. How do you see that success impacting our ecosystem and economy?
Yeah, terrific question. So I have, like many that believe in Tucson, that have made Tucson our home. I am hugely optimistic about our city's future. I think we suffer to a certain degree with this inferiority complex, this stepchild to the greater city up north, and we need to, rather than feel like a second class citizen or second fiddle, say what do we have to offer? And it's no secret that Tucson has a larger concentration from an economy standpoint in the defense industry and government spending. And this is not rocket science here, but pardon the pun. But having a more diverse economic base, I think all communities aspire to. And I think, as I've watched our city evolve, I'll never forget, and I'm going to go way back in time, Mayor Walkup. Were you around, Brian?
He knocked on my front door when he was running for mayor. Yep.
Yeah, but it was fascinating for me, and I was much younger at the time, seeing how cities wanted to position themselves and how they wanted to market themselves to attract new business. And I was coming down the Tucson International Airport, the escalator, and saw this banner of Mayor Walkup, and it was Tucson Optics Valley. I don't know if you remember that, right? And it was an attempt at the time to leverage the infamous optics department at the U of A and position Tucson as an optics center of the universe. And I think in more recent times, everyone aspires to be the next Silicon Valley and attract more technology companies because that's sexy and cool. Now life sciences has really emerged, and there's a lot of startup kind of mushroom companies that are getting created today in this environment. You're closer to this, Brian, than I am, and that's really encouraging. But I think I have always struggled with, if I can just say it, respect, right? Having to put up with snickers or people that will chuckle and say, well, what do you do for a living? And I'll say, well, I wash cars. And they'll smile in a very condescending way. And I'll say, we'll see who gets the last laugh on this one. So I've always played with a chip on my shoulder, quite frankly. But what I've learned is that there's a lot of sectors out there that may not be that sexy or glamorous, that can be highly profitable, can scale to heights beyond imagination, but actually base and be headquartered here where we're creating good jobs. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to lift this whole city, it starts with is the economy stupid, right? And so for our city to have a close to 25% of our population living below the poverty level, that's not a good thing for our city, right? So how can we raise wages? How can we create more jobs? And I'm really, really proud of our track record, because the 300 plus FTEs here in our office, the median income extrapolated out senior management, which can always skew data, is north of 75K. And so we're one small part of what hopefully will be many more companies that choose to get located here. And when I see companies that go through mergers and acquisitions, sadly, without referencing any names, some of them enjoy great financial success, but then choose to uproot and go to Connecticut, or uproot and take certain divisions and move them to Indianapolis or to Switzerland. And so what is the real job creation behind those success stories? To me, it's a little flimsy. Mr. Carwash, this is our home, and we are the world's largest car wash operator, 365 stores strong. We aspire to get to 1,000 in relatively short order, but we just brought on a CFO from Yum Brands, which is KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, and they're notorious for scaling their business to insane heights. He comes from an environment where at 14,000 units, then all of a sudden you're big. So when I look at Starbucks and I say, hey, Starbucks' journey has been incredible. How quickly they've gotten to over 15,000 units in the US alone. And Starbucks is opening up 2 stores a day in China alone right now. The real challenge for us is, so great. We just did an IPO, amazing event. I'm still emotional from what just happened a short, less than 90 days ago. But now the pressure on us is to turn around and scale. And scaling a company, Brian, easier said than done, right? So building a company is tough. Getting a company off the ground is hard. Scaling it to the heights that we have scaled it to is incredibly difficult, and then running it and maintaining it. But what we're doing is building something with enduring value, with an unbelievable runway for growth, and we're just getting started.
Wonderful. Now, and obviously, $5 million a store is a slightly different economic model from the Starbucks and the Yum brand. So, figuring out how to address that. Is there a path to bringing that number down, or other things? Maybe this is in a related vein. So Pat asked about where you see technology taking Mr. Carwash. As we continue to see water becoming one of the most precious resources. And, is water access, does that have an impact on your bottom line?
For sure. So let me start by saying we take water conservation extremely seriously at Mr. Carwash. It's one of our important initiatives. We're very proud of the fact that we recycle north of 25% of the water that we're using to clean and rinse off of a car is being repurposed throughout our wash. So we have very advanced reverse osmosis systems, then water reclamation systems, and we'll repurpose that water in areas, lower rocker panels, underbody flush, inner wheel wells, and then some wet down activities. But right now, when we look at our fresh water consumption and what we're doing to reduce every single drop, today it's more environmentally friendly to go to a commercial car wash than it is to wash in your driveway. And almost every municipality understands that, and they get the fact that it's better for the environment to use a commercial car wash. The average home washer, we use anywhere from 80 to 100 gallons of water, fresh water per car. I think because of our business is kind of on stage and we're highly visible, we get called out perhaps more than the average bear on water consumption. When there's a whole, it takes, I think, 25 gallons of water to create 1 8-ounce cup of Starbucks coffee. And I've actually done the math on how many gallons of water it takes to create a pint of beer. But, the agricultural industry is notorious for kind of this God-given right to, access to water, and what the agricultural industry is doing, what the mining industry uses, sometimes flies below the radar. And when I say all those things, it sounds defensive. I don't mean to come across as defensive at all. We're doing our part, and we're continuing to ratchet that down, year over year. Do you want to talk about the technology behind that, or should I?
Well, I want to. Maybe this is the next piece of it, because so yes, I know that I've met with folks from some of these industries, and the technology sometimes moves really slowly in some industries, because you're talking about a scale that is very difficult to achieve at a mine level, where I think you have a little bit more control in your store setting. But Jeremy had asked about the analytics side of this, and I imagine that is a big part of how you figure out what you're using, what you're doing, how long does it take for someone to come through, and what have been your challenges and advantage in terms of recruiting software development talent and analytics to Tucson.
So there's 3 questions wrapped inside that. Let me start with the analytics opportunity, big data, and what we're doing to leverage so we process over 70 million transactions on an annualized basis. We believe we have approximately 9 million unique customers that we serve that generate those 70 million transactions. We collect a lot of data. I think we're not as good as we need to be in leveraging that data into actionable items to be more predictive, to create a more personalized one-to-one experience with our customers. The bulk of our customers today, sadly, are anonymous to us. We don't have a really elegant way to get more personally identifiable information in a voluntary way. There is a lot of technology out there, machine learning, license plate recognition software, object machine learning, where they can actually look at the shape of the vehicle and identify who is who. What we're doing right now to kind of leapfrog our competition, and speed up the entire process, but then learn more about what people are doing, is working towards a using the mobile phone as our primary portal and entry point for all transactions. And behind the scenes, we've made significant investments in our digital ecosystem to be able to support that. And to do that, I'm going to get a little nerdy here, but you have to take, your financial platform, right, your point of sale platform, sometimes your time and attendance platform, but then your marketing automation platform, and link them all together. And to do that, you need a giant team, which is to the second part of your question. We, like many employers, are having a real hard time attracting the type of talent that we need. And we love bringing in kids fresh from the university. Sometimes they don't have the relevant experience that we need so that we can hit the ground running. So we're doing a lot of recruiting, sadly, outside of Tucson, because we're just not finding the right types of candidates that we need. So the two, I'll call them pain points right now for us. IT has been one where we've quadrupled the size of the team in the last 3 years, but we can't invest in that group quickly enough. And it's a very, very large strength. In fact, we poached, I probably shouldn't say this, we poached our VP of IT from the U of A, Lauren Babson, and she's been absolutely transformative, but she has helped us get to where we need to be. And now our opportunity, and we just brought in a VP of digital automation from San Diego to help us get this next round off the ground, which is taking this digital platform and turning it into an opportunity where we can better engage with our customers through their phone, and quite frankly, have them change their behavior, where they can come in and use us more often, but do it in an elegant way where they are doing it voluntarily, not through some push notification thing.
So the talent is not what you're seeing, or at least the pipeline that you're seeing is not sufficient locally to supply what you need for the organization.
That's correct.
Okay, that's a good message that I think we need to make sure we relate to the various educators and others in the community.
But I think, so it's one thing to focus from an educational front, but then, we're looking for, and this is just the stage that we are in our life cycle, folks that can bring that 5 to 10 years worth of experience that they now have garnered from working in other organizations and other sectors to Mr. Carwash. So it's a blend of, we've done, you can promote from within, you can recruit locally, but you also need to bring in some, at a certain point, folks that can help you take it to the next level. And that's kind of where we are today, because things have gotten definitely more sophisticated and more complex, and the need for higher caliber talent is really important. And I'll never forget, I met with Mayor Rothschild. I'm going to pick on him now for a second, since I picked on Walkup. And he asked me at the time, what is our biggest challenge? I said, talent acquisition is really tough. And so he brought in his czar. He jumped out of his desk, brought in his czar for economic development. And she proceeded to tell me about this work release program where we can get people that have made some bad decisions, jobs. And it's a very noble, good thing, but he completely wasn't listening to the questions that you're asking, which are data analytics, machine learning, financial planning and analysis. With that department, again, back to the need for us to interpret the data and understand it. We have a lot of folks that collect information and organize it and harvest it and tee it up, but the interpretation and the meaning, that to me is, it's not the heavy lifting, but it's finding that needle in the haystack and then turning that into an opportunity. There's a little bit of art to that, definitely a science. Those folks, every company is looking for, right? And we're doing a lot of recruiting to Tucson, and I find myself sitting across the table with a couple as I have my recruiting hat on all the time, and we're wooing a prospective, vice president of X. And oftentimes it's the spouse that will look at Tucson and say, the last question is about our schools. They ask questions about our politics. They're very interested in the cultural, activities. I press the UNESCO City of Culinary. I forgot the actual definition. Um, but I am the biggest cheerleader and promoter, and sometimes I wear this tourist bureau hat. But I am into seeing the city become more beautiful over time. We have such natural beauty, but quite frankly, there are pockets of the city that need a haircut, and we need more investment. And so, I'm one of the minority views with respect to, someone's got to pay for it, right? So how are we going to get there? And if we have a no tax mandate from our state legislature, we're never going to get out of the rut that we're in, because I think one of the things we can all commonly agree on is that our roads suck, right? We need to spend more on our schools, and so we can lift education, the literacy rate, so we can get more qualified individuals out. So this whole K through 12, actually preschool, and the importance of getting those kids from a launching pad off the ground, those are things that are very important to us.
I think that the discussion around infrastructure, let's face it, it's even at a federal level. So clearly people are starting to understand that we've underspent in these areas for some time. So I want to close with one question that they always like to ask, which is, for the students and entrepreneurs in the room, what advice do you have for them in, building on your own path, your own career, and really helping them to think about what questions they should be asking or trying to do?
Yeah, so a couple things, and I'm going to go back to my dad, who was hugely uh, influential and my hero. When he told me, and he was an immigrant to the United States, he came over when he was 25, didn't speak any English, and was very grateful for this country and the opportunities that are available. And so we're very fortunate to be born in a country that has such a strong economic base, and that you can really be anything that you want to be if you put in the work. And so the from a work ethic standpoint, his famous line was, for the first 5 years coming out of college, work like a dog. And it's put very simply, what he forgot to tell me, and he's in heaven now, but what he forgot to tell me was that, here I am 40 years later, and I'm still working like a dog, Brian. And I thought that things might get a little easier. It doesn't. And this is not that, groundbreaking, but there's no substitute to grinding it out and working hard. And then back to my comment about persistence, right? It's easy to switch. It's easy to jump ship. It's easy to think the grass is greener. Sometimes sticking to things and knowing that, to your earlier comment, there's no such thing as a straight line from a career path standpoint. There's twists and turns in the road. And I think the hard part for anybody is knowing when you're at that juncture, should I go left, should I go right, door number one, door number two, without any degree of certainty. So you need to follow your heart, you need to follow your gut. But then also, if I were to oversimplify that, if I was at that juncture, I would say, look at the sector. Is it a sector that has a growth dynamic around it? Or is it a sector that has headwinds where there's some secular things that are perhaps making this industry contract harder? You can certainly do well in those in any industry, but it's certainly easier when you have tailwinds versus headwinds. And then look inside. If the checkbox is the business, the industry is growing, there's beautiful trends, and then the company that you're looking to join forces with is doing some good things and has a leadership position and has a distinct difference about what they're doing. And then, the values of that company, the principles that those companies believe in, are important. And, how they treat their team members and the culture that they have. It's hard to suss that out in an interview. Glassdoor is not the best way to get a temperature gauge. So it's do your diligence, right? And do your homework, and from there, take that giant leap of faith.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time today, John, and meeting with us. And um, I'm hoping that these AMAs we can move toward an in-person version of them in the not so distant future. And knowing that you're just around the corner from us should make it pretty easy to maybe schedule another one sometime next year and do that one in person.
We're on the other side of the railroad tracks. You're in the cool zone. We're in the hood. But love to, Brian. Thanks you so much for inviting me, and happy to participate. And if I could just say, I think the work that you're doing to promote a more prosperous economic base in Tucson is terrific. And so I'm a huge fan of Forge and what you're doing.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and see you next month. Bye, all.